It's no secret that the way you deliver a consult in physiotherapy directly links to how successful it is. Some people are really good at it, some people are terrible at it, and we really need to remember as physios that it's not what we say that leads to the success of the consult, it's how we make our patients feel that has the biggest impact on our long-term relationship with them. So having a good system to establish that is really important, because if you're tired and you've got a new patient in, you really need a system of tools to ensure that you deliver a really good consult and that you make the patient feel good about the news that you're about to give them, so that you can maximise their buy-in and have a long-term physio-patient relationship. So I'm going to share with you the things that I do in every single new client consult to maximise the patient's outcomes by leveraging the relationship between the physio and the patient. So number one, it's super simple. I just introduce myself. Hi, my name's Leon. Come on in, it's nice to meet you. So far too often when we're tired or we've seen lots of people, or we just forget that these patients are in an uncomfortable situation. They've got to meet a perfect stranger, reveal intimate details about their lives, and so we need to work hard at every point in the consultation to relieve that anxiety and stress and awkwardness for the person who's coming in to see you. And if you can remove that tension early, then it makes rapport building a lot easier in the consult. So introduce yourself. Hey, it's nice to meet you. My name's Liam. Come on through. The next one is to ask open-ended questions. Now, so you've brought them into the room, you've sat them down, it's time for the consult to begin. To make your life easier, you want to get the patient to give you as much information as possible without you having to ask too many questions. So the less questions you need to ask, the better. So my starting questions with all these patients is something I've taken from the great Peter O'Sullivan, which is, tell me your story, and let them guide the subjective. And then along the way, you ask some clarifying questions and get some specific information you need, but for the most part, you want your patient to direct the conversation in the beginning. Because remember, your job with the subjective is really to understand how this problem is impacting the patient and obtain diagnostic information. So open-ended questions to get them to guide the consult. After you've run your subjective, you want to summarise their story. So after you've completed your subjective and you have a good understanding of their problem and how it's impacting their lives, you want to summarise what they've said to you in a few sentences. Now, with this section, I recommend that you use language that they've used in their description of their problem back to them. So if they say, it feels like a night, say that back in your summary. And then finally, once you've summarised, finish off with anything else you'd like me to know? And this does a couple of things. It makes you listen intently because you know you need to say it back to the patient, and it forces you to understand how this problem is affecting them, and it makes the patient feel heard because you've listened well enough to be able to explain it back to them. And this gives the patient confidence in your abilities because they're confident you know everything there is to know about their problem and how it's impacting their life. So a few tips with this. I mentioned it before, but mirror the words that they use in their subjective back to them in your summary. So if they feel things like it feels tight, it feels locked, it's achy, etc., use that language back to them in your summary. And keep your summary brief. That would be my second tip. So next, you've taken your subjective, it's time to move on to your assessment. Now this part's relatively straightforward. You perform your assessment as you need to and formulate your diagnosis. But instead of moving straight into treatment, sit the patient down and explain to them what you've found, how this links to their problem and how it can be fixed. So my tip here is to use an anatomy app. So I recommend Essential Anatomy, I think it's 3. It's super cheap. It's not their latest one, but it's super cheap and easy to use. It's a bit of a wow factor for patients. You can also have it on your desktop computer, but I would suggest just buying an iPad for a couple $100 and use it with every single patient. But make sure you make that moment of sitting them down and explaining how you came to your diagnosis. So then you move on to your treatment phase. Now, typically after you've assessed your patient, you'll go into some form of treatment. It's usually a combination of some hands-on, needles, manipes, whatever it is. But this is where you can flip from being sort of professional information gathering physio and to a more personable approach. So this is the time where you can ask about their kids, what they like to do for fun, what their kids like to do for fun, and here's a chance for you to share a little bit about yourself. You don't want heaps, but just make yourself open enough so that patients get a small sense of who you are. Because our goal with this first consult is to strike up a strong relationship, and that's a two-way street. They need to know about you, and you need to know about them. Now, after you've treated them, you want to reassess your asterisk signs and then explain your findings. So after you've done your treatment, you'll have to reassess your patient, see if you've created any change. This will likely be some sort of range of motion test or pain test or potentially something functional, but you want to make the time here to sit the patient down and briefly explain what you've done, how it made the change, and how it impacts their function. And this is a really good chance to use that anatomy app again. Now moving on, after you've treated them and explained it, you'll head on to your exercise or your rehabilitation sort of phase. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a separate gym space, then I would recommend taking your patient out of your treatment room and into the gym space. This creates a shift in the mood and a change of pace for the patient, and it also allows you to switch from being that personal physio get to know me type of person into professional follow my instructions physio. So in here you're going to demonstrate your exercises, and then I would highly recommend this, that you send the exercises to them using an exercise app. I reckon the best option out there is Physio app. Super easy to use, it's really cheap, it's a great option. Has an app on your phone or your iPad, or you can get through it through a web browser. And then you want to move on, after you've demonstrated your exercises, bring them back into the room, and then you want to treatment plan them from there. Now this is a whole video in itself, but for every patient that comes into your clinic, they should all leave with a treatment plan. And that's a written piece of paper that explains exactly how they get from where they are now to where they need to be. And then you want to book your appointments in. So make your life easy by putting in just the first few times that you need to catch up with your patient. So, you don't have to worry about it next time. And look, if you're a new grad physio, then I recommend that you do this yourself. Sit down with the patient in the treatment room and then book the catch-ups with them, just to minimize the friction between making the appointments, and that'll help ensure that you get a good patient compliance. And basically that's it. So it seems like a lot, but if you do these things at a minimum, then you'll maximize the client experience, which will ultimately improve your patient outcomes from the very first visit. Now, this isn't a substitute for being a good physio. You do have to be a good physio as well, but this will maximize being a good physio. Now, if you like this stuff, then subscribe to my email newsletter. I'll be sharing some weekly physio tips, tricks, and learnings, and just other stuff I'm into for that week. The link is below. Bye.